Bruce Mathews is a personal friend, as he is to many of you, and he's been a tremendous supporter of City Union Mission, and probably many other organizations in Kansas City as well. Besides his giftedness that we all know him for in photography, we also know him for his books that he has both authored, co-authored, and produced. One of my favorites, though, is one that he has for sale back there on the Elmwood Cemetery, because some of you will know that the famous Annie Chambers is buried there, and she was one of the early supporters of City Union Mission, giving her former brothel to us back in the early 30s. So I appreciate that book in particular, but I won't take Bruce's time to talk about all these other books. He has them for sale back here. They are wonderful. You ought to take advantage of them for sure. But what impresses me also about Bruce, and besides his giftedness, is that he gives back proceeds from his books to further help in Kansas City. And so we are just grateful to have a person like Bruce Mathews. So please give Bruce a warm rotary welcome.
All I can say is you folks must be gluttons for punishment. This is my third time to speak to your group, and I've really enjoyed myself every time. The book I'm going to talk about today is Windows of Kansas City, is Art, History, and Inspiration. I spent about 2 years photographing stained glass windows in Kansas City, and thanks to John Dillingham, within an hour's drive of Kansas City as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I first became enamored with stained glass windows in 2007 when I was hired by the Kansas City Museum to photograph a guy named Stu Langer, who was restoring all the windows in Corinthian Hall. And so he took them all apart, took them down to the studio across from the Golden Ox, and started to number them and relit them and put them back in place. And then I've loved them ever since. I consider stained glass windows definitely works of art. But unlike paintings, where you go into a museum and see a whole collection of them, that becomes very problematic with stained glass windows because of their locations. And I kind of like stained glass windows a little differently than paintings. You go into a museum, you look at a painting, no matter how wonderful it is, you go back the next time, you're going to see exactly the same painting. But with stained glass windows, they're like snowflakes. You're never going to see the same window twice. The window is different at 8 o'clock in the morning as it is at 8 o'clock at night. It's different with the sun shining through it, and it's different on a cloudy day. It's even different looking in the spring than it is in the fall. And there's just a whole lot of reasons doing it. I wrote and photographed all the book. I usually do books by committee, as some of you know, but the only other person who wrote anything for this book was Shirley Ellsberg, and she wrote the foreword to the book. And I also featured Webster House in the book. It's got a great story behind it. I didn't want it to be just a church book, so I photographed books in homes and restaurants and schools and hospitals, wherever they might be. And the cover photo is, I'm sure all of you are familiar with this house, at the northwest corner of 55th and Ward Parkway. It's Ann Dickinson's home now. It was designed by Lewis Curtis in 1913, and was designed for a gentleman by the name of Bernard Corrigan, who was a railroad contractor in Kansas City, and the instigator behind the construction of the Baltimore Hotel and a lot of other projects in Kansas City. It's 100 years old, or 100 years old. Bernard Corrigan, who's shown here, died 2 months before the house was completed, so he never got to live there. It was on most of the Sutherland family. They were the longest term owner of the home. The windows are actually, Louis Curtis himself designed the windows, and they're a wisteria type pattern. And they look beautiful at night. A lot of the windows actually look better at night during that magic hour when the sun goes below the horizon looking in, and they look better than they do looking out. This is the first windows that I photographed, like I say, in Corinthian Hall. It was, of course, the home of R.A. Long. R.A. Long, this is, how many of you have been in Corinthian Hall? So this, you all notice this huge window at the top of the landing and the grand staircase. And Stu had to take that apart piece by piece, number every one of them like a big jigsaw puzzle, and then put it back together. There's also windows in a number of other rooms in the home, which he restored as well. It's interesting, the connections, when you start looking at cemeteries or the history of buildings and everything. And R.A. Long on your left, and George Hamilton Combs on the right. R.A. Long, actually, they became connected for the rest of their lives. R.A. Long's daughter Lula married George Hamilton Combs' son prior. And so any of you know Lula Long Combs in the history of the American Royal and Horses. That's where her name comes from. The other interesting connection, he was the minister of the Independence Boulevard Christian Church. It's still standing. It's one of those midtown churches you drive by and you think it's boarded and closed up and everything. In its heyday, when he, up through the 40s, they had 3,000 members. Now they're lucky if they get 30 on a given Sunday, and half of them are homeless. But the building inside is still in wonderful shape, thanks to a trust that R.A. Long set up, and you can start to see the windows they're on each side like this. And close up, this is what they look like. A number of them, at least 3, are Tiffany stained glass windows, and they're signed down at the bottom. I wanted to give credit to all the artists that created some of these masterpieces, and that became problematic because some of the churches didn't want the artists to sign their windows, and even some of the Tiffany windows, the studio would sign some of the more pedestrian windows, but they wouldn't sign some of the more elaborate windows, so that became very difficult. The other connection is this guy. How many know the name Charles Ashley Smith? One person. You know his buildings that he designed. He was an architect in Kansas City. And from 1898 to the 1940s, he was an architect for the Kansas City School District. And he designed all of the beautiful old school buildings that are in various states of disrepair right now. He designed Southwest. How many went to Southwest? A lot of South. He designed Northeast. He designed Paseo. He designed a lot of those beautiful old schools. He designed this church, the Lynwood Boulevard Christian Church, which is a Presbyterian church, which has just been restored. This is the 69th and Warnell. It's now what's this church from? It's now Christ Community Church. It was designed in 1926 as the Sixth Church of Christ Science. And it's interesting, new congregations in some of these old church buildings like Christ Community. How long have you been in there? About 5 years? 4 years. They have no clue of the history of their building. So I'm in there photographing it, and there's nothing to be found. I ran into a janitor. He said, go look in that closet back here. And so I went back in there, and under all the dust and everything was all the original construction drawings, the payment vouchers for the architect and the stained glass artist, even the payment vouchers for the furniture they had just bought from Duff and Rep. I mean, you remember Duff and Rep. He also designed the building. He also designed the old Kansas City building. He designed the old, he was one of the 3 designers of the old library building up there at 9th and Locust. These windows are in the tube room in the old Kansas City Club building. How many of you attended an event in there? Can you take a close look at these windows? They look very liturgical, but if you look at them close, and they were right out of the Renaissance Festival. They represent the upper and lower classes of Tudor society. Very whimsical. They were designed in 1965 by a guy named Ron Dixon, who worked for Hopcroft Stained Glass Company. He's still alive. He lives in Staunton, Virginia. He's about 83 years old down there, and he's still doing windows. He also designed Central United Methodist Church after their fire in '65. He designed those new windows as well. I was also amazed at the contemporary artists that we have doing windows, not only across the country, but right here in Kansas City. These two windows are in the, what is now the Community of Christ Church, out in Independence, former RLDS church. They're a big temple out there. This one, the sand-carved window is by a lady, Kathy Barnard, who has a studio right over 16th and Locust. This is just a portion of a large surround that you walk under as you go into the sanctuary. This window is on the west side of the temple out there. You can see how tall it is, 1 story, 2 story. It's about 5 stories tall, and so it's a very huge window. It's a contemporary version of a wheat field. And just one. This is another one of Kathy Barnard's creations. This is about 17.5 feet across. It's huge. It's out in the Jewish Community Center campus on the west side. You walk underneath it when you're going into the White Theater out there. It's a contemporary version of the Tree of Life. The biggest enemy of our fountains in Kansas City is the water itself. Corrodes the pipe, discolors the stone. And the biggest enemy of stained glass windows is their sheer weight. And you can imagine 17 feet across how much this thing weighs. So these black ribbons, which he has artfully incorporated, are all steel ribbons as structural supports for that window. It's they have to get very creative. And I photographed some of the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception, Grace and Holy, and of course, Our Lady of Perpetual Help, Redemptress down at Linwood and Broadway. The windows in there are just incredible. Still in Cathedral of Immaculate Conception. And this is a contemporary window they have. It's over the chancel on the south side. And I was there for probably 4 hours photographing the window. And toward the evening, the sun starts coming across there, and you can see the light that it starts shedding across the pipe organs and onto another wall over there. It's just beautiful. Some of the windows look better at night. This one looks good all the time. I was actually, I told you about John Dillingham, and I was to dinner one night, and he says, "You've got to include windows in the Commanding General Staff College at 411 work." And I said, "Well, John, it's just a Kansas City book." And he said, well, standing next to him was the deputy commandant from the fort. So I quickly said, "Okay, I'll do windows within an hour's drive." And so I'm glad I did. This is actually the Dole Institute in Lawrence, Kansas. And this is the largest American flag stained glass window in the country. And on this side, there's a contemporary depiction of Russell, Kansas, from where the Senator hails. That's just wonderful. These windows are actually in the Commanding General Staff College. I want to do it on time. Okay. There's these windows which are fairly, these are in the Lewis and Clark Center up on the fort, and they're dedicated to each war. And they're very interesting, starting with the Revolutionary War all the way through. Some of the older windows, the graduating class, each year would donate a window. This one that happens to be the 10th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers. So very, very interesting. How many of you have driven by and noticed this window? It was done by Eugene Roper. He has a little studio in Riverside. And I was bummed when they had to tear down the old Turtle family home to make way for this new building. This is the 35th and Southwest Traffic Way. This is the new St. Luke's Hospice House. And the reason I was bummed when they had to tear it down is because they had to cut down 2 beautiful trees in the front yard. The home wasn't worth saving. It was beyond trees had the best fall color in the city. And on the other side, there's a little small chapel. So now going into the chapel, you can see the altar and the cross were made from wood for those two trees in the front yard. I love the stories. The outside protecting on stained glass windows historically has been a material called lexan. And it discolors, fades, becomes yellow, and you can hardly see. Well, Country Club Christian Church went on and did a major construction project, and they removed all that old lexan material, and they're now seeing color in their windows that they had never seen before. They're even able to see some writing they had never seen before. The two different types of glass. These were done by Dr. Connick, Charles Connick, and every change in color is a different piece of glass. There's about 10,000 pieces of glass in each one of those windows. On the other hand, their St. Cecilia window on the Ward Parkway side, they're all painted, and every different color is a coat of paint that has to be then fired to like 1250 degrees. So some of these different paints of glass may go through that kiln about 10 to 15 times before they're finally done. It's a very Grace and Holy Trinity Cathedral. How many of you remember Shawsey? Shawsey Brand. Shawsey actually donated this piece right here. There's a wood carving, the Last Supper right there. And they're just beautiful. This window is done by a company out of St. Louis, Jacoby. This is a Tiffany. This is done by Whitefriars out of London. And they're the magnificent windows in that church. And in 1929, they had a fire, and it destroyed all of the windows that were in the chancel on the east side. So these are replacements that came just a couple of years later. And this window up by the organ in the balcony on the west side was dedicated to William Raquel Nelson and his family. And it is a Tiffany window. It's not the original Tiffany window that was there though. This window was not in any danger from the from the fire, but it was in danger from the firemen. They had to break it out completely to destroy it to vent the fire. It was designed by a lady named Agnes Fairchild Northrop, and thank goodness they were still in business. They came back and replaced the identical window. So it is a Tiffany window, but it's not the one that was there 2 years ago. The one museum exception, there are 16 stained glass windows down at the Nelson. Unfortunately, they're all, because the way they have to be, they're all backlit, so they don't get that change in light all the time. One of the biggest competitors of Lewis Comfort Tiffany was, having a brain freeze. But anyway, that gentleman did this window. It's called Peonies Blown in the Wind, and there's about 5,000 different pieces of glass in that window. It's probably not any larger than about 4 feet wide and 8 feet tall, something like that. Another Lewis Curtis design window. This is Mineral Hall down at Kansas Citians. It's the most photographed door in the city, particularly at night. Curtis designed the tile surround, and he designed the door and the side windows, and then the glass came out of Kokomo, Indiana, and it was fabricated by Hopcroft. This one. I was born in this hospital. I came home from the hospital on Christmas Day in 1948. This is the old, it was first a German hospital, and then it became research, and it was torn down to make way for Truman Medical Center, 23rd and Holmes. And these windows were in the inside set doors right in through there. And Almwood saved those windows when they tore down research. And they now are back in place within feet of where they originally were. They're in the north lobby of Truman Medical Center, and they separate the lobby from the small chapel. And they're just, these windows, they look very Frank Lloyd Wright-ish, Prairie style. And you could actually buy windows, stained glass windows at that time interesting. And here's Webster House, showing that. I took this photo from the Vitagraph building, but this is amazing. They're not great windows by any means comparable. They're just these little transom windows, 6-inch squares. But I became fascinated with it because of the history of that building. It was the old Webster School. It was built in 1885. And all we think of the Civil War or anything before 1900, we think in terms of black and white, because that's the photographs we see. Can you imagine the elementary student kids sitting in this classroom and now all of that beautiful sunlight washing over them? It's just great. Shirley also uncovered one of the old chalkboards, and so if you go eat in this room, you can see that chalkboard there. It's just great. Okay. This is tough. The Pilgrim Chapel. How many of you have been to an event in the Pilgrim Chapel? Built in 1926, 1927, originally as a Lutheran church, exclusively for the deaf. The whole congregation was deaf. It seats about 80 people, about the same size as the Elmwood Chapel in Elmwood Cemetery. Mainly it's rented out for small weddings and everything. And there's just this one window above the door when you walk in, Christ healing the deaf, and there's a marker outside in the front yard. I dedicated this book to my sons. The day that I photographed the Pilgrim Chapel, we got the call that evening that our oldest son had died in an accident. And I tell you, so the last 3 months of the book, the first few months have been very labor of love. The last few months were very therapeutic because I would spend hours, and I still go back to Pilgrim Chapel because of that day. So I have basically retired from 35 years of photography assignment work, and I tell people I'm transitioning from assignments I have to do to projects I want to do. And these books are an example of those projects. And we spend as much time as we can with our grandkids now too, and we're enjoying that time with them. Okay, that's just a few of the windows in the book. I've got them back on a table for sale. Proceeds go to a group called FOSS, Friends of Sacred Structures. Do I have 2 more minutes? Okay. Put down October the 11th on your calendar. The book launch event for the next book will be at about 6:30 in the evening at the Plaza Library, and it's called Kansas City, Our Collective Memories. And I've been having a ball with this, photographing things that we collect that relate to the history of Kansas City. Some of the items you can see. Here's a 1956 Kansas City Athletics jersey, #1. I'll give a book to anybody who can tell me who was #1 for the Kansas City A's in 1956. Come up with that. This actually is Margaret Truman's tricycle, and I got a picture in the book of her riding that tricycle. And this is one of the souvenirs that we give away at the Priest Palace. Here's Barnett's I Love Blood. This is a medallion that they wore at the dedication of Liberty Memorial in 1921. So we tell the stories behind those. If any of you have things you might want to include in such a book, this is actually just the first of 5 volumes we're going to do. Even stuff like the Kansas City has hosted 3 national political conventions, 1900, 1928, and 1976. So there's some of this stuff. The old Baltimore Hotel and the Willis Wood Theater. This is where City Center Square is right now, the old Baltimore Hotel. And there was an underground tunnel connecting those two. And during the intermissions of the Willis Wood, the men would leave the theater, they'd go to the Baltimore Hotel, get a drink, and go back. So it was it was designed by Lewis Curtis as well. And these are some of the things, some china from the hotel, a silver platter. Patricia Hillary Miller has a whole collection of furniture for the hotel. Municipal Stadium, it's a great story. The day before they tore Municipal Stadium down, I went down and took a row of seats out. So I've had these all these years, 1976. So I photographed a couple of them, and then just by accident, I found this photograph of my father and my oldest brother in 1939, sitting in their seats, watching a Blues game in what at the time was called Rupert Stadium. We went from Mulebach Field to Rupert Stadium to Blues Stadium, then the A's, and they actually tore down in 1955 the one-story structure that was there and put up to 2 decks for that one. Another thing, in doing this, when I became good friends with a lady named Nancy Finley, and Nancy Finley was the niece of Charlie Finley, and she just published a book called Finley Ball, and actually she came here from Oakland and promoted it at the library. So look at it, it's just a hoot. And on page 1 is none other than Crosby Kemper III and his father, Crosby Kemper Jr. Crosby Kemper Jr. was Charlie Finley's banker during that time, so it's very interesting stories that come out of it. Okay, I'm done. I have books available for sale if you want to pick up one now, and the others are already done. Thanks.
Bruce, thank you for your presentation, and we have a few minutes for some Q&A. So, Carl. Campanella. Was Campanella number 1 in Kansas City Athletics in 1956? Was that? Sorry, didn't get a book.
At the end, can you put one up there that he just
Alan's the Charles Finley, number 1.
I want to take a picture of him.
No one's got it. We have a question, Christy?
In the section on Municipal Stadium, the feature, I also included a jersey that George Tolman wore when he was head groundskeeper there. He started in '57, and a post photo of him that appeared in Sports Illustrated next to Harvey the Rabbit. I mean, Harvey the Rabbit. And a George Tolman bobblehead dog.
Well, my question was, a lot of the actual high schools, because you brought up the high schools, Northeast, we had a very beautiful stained glass window as you came up our front steps. And also, yes, it is. In fact, it's in our alumni room because we have the largest alumni association of any high school in the United States. Very active. And also Eastminster Presbyterian Church has gorgeous stained glass windows that you need to check out. And that was also a big church that most of the pipe organs, the one over at Boulevard Christian Church and Eastminster, both were from the Jenkins family, which was Jenkins Music on the street here.
They're very
One more question?
Yes.
Ask me a question now.
The colors in glass are minerals or something are put in there. Can you speak to a little bit how they get the beautiful colors? Bruce, use Mike.
Tiffany had a very unique formula for his glass, for example. Matter of fact, he destroyed that formula right before he died because he didn't want anybody else to duplicate his glass. But sometimes they would actually, he had a technique called drapery glass, and he would take multiple layers of glass, and when they were still molten, he would fold them over. And for example, this glass wasn't flat at all. If that happened going to be a fold in an angel's skirt. You can rub your hand across it and you just feel all the pleats in the skirt. But some of the artwork, some of the painting work are just incredible. Even the ones that are all glass, but if they have a figure in them, the hands and the feet and the face are painted, basically. Then the whole rest of the piece can be cut glass and everything. Different techniques. I'm going to ask to photograph for another look. How many of you are members of the Church of the Resurrection? They have an interesting project going on out there. Matter of fact, in 2 weeks, I think they're going to start installing. The Church of the Resurrection is name of the company is Judson Studios out of Los Angeles, and they're going to install in their new sanctuary the largest stained glass window in the world. It's 35 feet off the ground, and then the window itself extends up 37 feet, and it's 95 feet wide. And the whole story of the creation and everything, it's huge. But they want to do a book on just the windows. So, thanks.
Bruce, thank you for your On behalf of our club, the Kansas City Rotary Club, we want to present you with a certificate in honor that you spoke at one of our, what we think is one of the greatest Rotary clubs of the 30,000 plus clubs in